necessarily imitating the physiognomy of the real minerals, but can be imagined as soft materials that can be paired with other soft furniture. And in my classrooms, I have extended this idea of the tubular structure to create playgrounds within the classrooms. And also this tubular structure extends further to define the roof structure of my classroom clusters, which then also define these playgrounds within the landscape. You can see that how my enclosures extend and create this curvilinear boundaries between the landscapes and the playgrounds for different classroom clusters. And here I have explored this role of the line to divide, join, connect, and create partitions between my different units. And while designing my site plan, I wanted to explore these ideas of the line further, and I wanted to explore it within the context of my site. And as you can see here, I have created this bridge between this park adjacent to my site, connecting it to the LA River, and also dividing my site into two. There is this lower part of my site that is more recessed, and the upper part of my site that has an elevation equivalent to the rest of the area. At the upper part, you can see here, there's this gym which has this upper terrace area that is a more private space for the users. And here there's this administration building, but the whole landscape is open for the use of the public and available to all. And there is this different materialities within the surface, and this recessed area is more private for the use of the children to create a more private area without the use of physical boundaries such as walls. So you can see that within my site, I have utilized this line to create these different site elevations and then materialities, surfaces, the growth of the landscape, and I tried to bring back the idea of the minerals growing between these different surfaces through the use of gold leaf, and try to create this rich environment for the children to learn. Thank you.
I really, hi, I really appreciate that you're proposing an addition as a way to produce a classroom in the field. So it seems that kind of more research and laboratory environment would be the kind of a different, it would produce a different pedagogy for the school that's already situated there. And I haven't seen, of course, this is the first project that we see, so I'm not sure if everybody's going to have a kind of similar approach through landscape, but that seems to be so powerful to connect play to the environment and to landscape, and to kind of bridge that gap between the interior, more, let's say, academic classroom environment and the field and research and laboratory. And I think that you've done this amazing job of like allowing your site to transition between the sports field on the one hand and like both in many ways the sports field that are very structured as well as the classrooms, but your piece allows for the exploration that you're talking about. And I appreciate the fact that you've shown us how you can actually produce these hybrid forms of things that we recognize, let's say as furniture or as almost like playground pieces, with things that you are more interested in, the kind of geometric curves and softness and different materialities, dunescapes, etc. So there's a kind of hybridization of things that seem to be a little bit more formal and addressed, let's say, a kind of old school academic environment of the classroom with those new concepts of research, field, laboratory, soft materialities, etc. That seems to be super powerful.
Thank you.
I actually was really intrigued by how your classroom almost you mentioned that they are tent-like, and I think that is so appropriate in terms of like the idea of having some kind of nomadic tent of the classroom, that it is not an enclosed typical classroom that one would be thinking, and then so you have really made a big proposition here to suggest that it's kind of going back to a more a more organic form, classroom, kibitz, people sitting around under a tent. Things are temporary, things are always moving, and it really takes away from the idea of permanence and essentially conditioned classroom that we always understand to be, where furnitures are always aligned in a row. So I really like the idea. I like your proposition of creating this kind of new kind of learning environment. And I like the fact that the that those tent-like classroom are nested with the contour, and it works really well, kind of organically with the landscape. Even the edge along, I think, is that the edge along the river, or is that the edge along the San Fernando Road? This edge here, this edge. Is this the river or San Fernando Road?
Like, let me also. The lower part, as you go further down, is the river, and the road is at the upper part of the side.
Okay, so this is San Fernando up here, and the river is on this side. So basically,
yes.
Right? Okay, that's what I appreciate, is that kind of sense of really becoming so natural along the river. Is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have actually, I'm sorry, tried to like create a space that is divided visually, but doesn't have boundaries. So I wanted to establish that with the use of contours and enable everyone to interact with each other within this open space.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of questions. I
Maybe
think
you can zoom in into those renders, please.
Yeah, I can't have Miro on my computer and all of these other things because it won't work.
Should I zoom in? I missed what you said.
Zoom.
If you can zoom in into the renders they're talking about, the site render,
Okay.
the number 11.
Actually, I'd be curious to see number 8. It kind of doesn't matter though, because I just want to look closer at the project. I think, you know, I was on your review, Florencia, for mid-review, but I think I came late, so I might have missed this one. I don't recognize this one. And so part of my questions has to do with the classroom, and I think the classroom was what was kind of focused on for mid-review, right? And since then you've kind of moved out and looked at the site. And so I don't know if the strategy is that something like the classroom from mid-review was deployed, you know, multiplied perhaps and deployed across the site, along with other kinds of site strategies, along with new. You were talking about the public, so some of your site is accessible. In this image, the public site, I'm assuming is. Can you guys hear me? My internet's.
Yes.
Did I freeze? I just got a warning on my screen that I just don't want to talk if I'm talking to myself. But the area
It goes
on the top of the image, that's the public area. Is that right?
Let me annotate it.
On and
This
off?
part is the
Okay, I
public area,
suppose that doesn't
and
matter.
this is the private area.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I feel like I know less about your classroom, and I'm kind of curious. I don't think this mural board quite shows. I know you show your furniture, but I don't. The things that are furniture like are a little bit more playground like too. So I feel like I know less about your classroom idea, and even in terms of how you're distributing it, or what the idea of classroom, the relationship of classroom to landscape might be. I like your landscape. I like looking at it from from kind of far away, because it looks like one of those, like it kind of vacillates between landscapes that, you know, describe their geometries with, you know, different kinds of saturations of color, for instance. So you might see, but because your geometry is maybe curvilinear geometry, it also kind of reads like those landscapes that are very wet. And so a lot of the kind of coloration comes from like pools of kind of mineral deposits and so forth. Then you get, I mean, you don't have to get that close to see that they look like furniture. They look like soft. I'd be so curious to see if you had in your renderings someone occupying these kinds of hills that look like foam, and just to see their feet like sinking into them, or trying to figure out how they're managing I don't know, this kind of walking along the terrain, that kind of strange hilly terrain that you've developed. It's so interesting. Like it looks like foam. So it's so strange, right? Is it foam? Are you suggesting it's soft and kind of squishy?
Well, this material is more like a soft surface for the children to play. And then there are these sand surfaces, and then the gold leaf. The material changes within different surfaces.
But what about the hills?
Hills, you mean these?
Yeah.
They are actually buildings. They need to be developed further in the future, but there are different scales. This is the gym here with this elevated part, and then it has a terrace for more private use. And yeah, they are buildings, and they change in scale along the side to create this different forms of playgrounds. And then they are enlarged to define the enclosures of my buildings. It is an extension of my use of tent within the classroom in a different use of utilization of the material.
So I'm doing a bit of interrogating, and I apologize for that, just trying to figure it out. You have some of those same materials and similar forms in your kind of more private school area too. So I'm assuming you have things that are like classrooms that are more they look more transparent on your site, and then things that are more buildings, and maybe they have a different program besides the classroom there. I'm still curious because of how it's rendered, and I feel like I can like put my finger into your model and squish it. And I'm fascinated by that, partly because you still it reads like landscape. You're saying it's buildings, but it reads like hills. It reads like you can kind of climb around these things. And it also reads soft, and that's weird. And I'm just wondering like whether there was some idea of some soft, squishy building. I mean, maybe they're not hills, maybe they're buildings, but maybe they're buildings that you are still hills. You can still kind of navigate their surface, and maybe they still are squishy. And I don't know how you kind of achieve that, but it's just weird. And I was just curious about it, especially if it was something you had been thinking about. And I'm curious about, I guess, how you might manage these kinds of gradients of learning and play. And I know that you want there to be a kind of ambiguity across your site in terms of how these programs that require a little bit more discipline and a little bit less discipline, or a little bit more kind of order and a little bit less order, their intensities kind of change across the field. But I'd also be curious about how that works, especially if I am allowed to kind of read these buildings as kind of squishy landscape too. because that's really, it's not just weird, it's also kind of fun, you know? So it kind of, it involves itself in the kind of, you know, the world of being a child, I guess. And on the one hand, play and learning are inseparable, except that at some point they are separated, right? Meaning that at some point you are sitting and kind of focusing on some lesson, and other moments you might be playing and have no lessons in mind. And then there's always the kind of in between where you're kind of tricked through play into learning something. Anyway, so that was kind of half comment, half trying to figure it out.
Well, actually, I want to say something like the integration of those squishy forms into the landscape was intentional in terms of referring to my original idea of this growth within the surfaces. I just here you can see it in crystal forms, but I want to explore the different ways of approaching this growth. So like there's this elevated side and these forms coming under it. So the space can be created within this surface and within this tent-shaped areas. So there can be both these flat surface enclosures, which are also paired with these squishy forms that can create different qualities of space within.
Ida, I thank you for a beautiful project. I think it's setting the tone for what we're going to see this afternoon, which is really great. I think Anna's comments initially were really I think pointed at the idea that you've really thought about expanding the territory of learning, and I think everyone's commented on that in different ways because you kind of set the table for us. But I think with this expanded way of territory of learning, it also kind of breaks down thresholds, right? In terms of like, I think maybe Ming said like conditioned areas versus non-conditioned areas, right? Formal learning areas and formal play areas. I think those things are getting broken down. And I don't know if this was a reference for you, but it might be interesting to kind of look back on. But your project reminds, there's definitely this territory of the like 1960s, 1970s kind of conversation pits, the kind of couches that were sunken into the floor of living rooms, right? And so I'm thinking of Saarinen Miller House, for example, and many, many others, where the living room and its role as a place to kind of host and in some ways have formal attributes, also would give way to these more casual, kind of leisurely environments where the couch actually structured a room within the room. And so I think that this territory of you wanting to kind of use these soft materials, but also define edges, there might be some interesting overlap there. And then maybe, I might be stretching here, but I think your interest in like the tent and me then thinking of the couches and the pillows, you know, I just think, you know, children love, like the couch tent is like the most incredible, you know, thing for kids to be able to kind of build their own environment, right? And so I think that there seems to be a couple references that are potentially overlapping, which I think are really fantastic. But I think the room within a room of the kind of couch lounge is something that might be super useful for you. And then just as a kind of a final side note, I love that you've got these tennis courts kind of adjacent to the site. And in the beginning, it looks like the playground sort of developed from this sort of tennis ball quality, where there's kind of the furry components and then the kind of structure of the line. I'm not sure, again, I might be making that connection, but there definitely seems to be this kind of beautiful connection between the kind of formal qualities of a tennis ball and the moments that are kind of furry and colorful versus the moments that are sort of linear and graphic.
Thank you.
What I go ahead, John.
Sorry, Ming. Yeah, the one thing that really strikes me about your project and I find really interesting is kind of the role reversal of how the school is organized versus how the circulation on top is organized. So you have like this really regimented but organic kind of circulation that I'm guessing is like for the public because it's going between the two parks or whatever. It actually goes over elementary school, which is actually opposite of how you would think of school. Like school's very, like, you know, they're one single file down the hallway kind of thing. So one thing that I find really striking is that you kind of have this classroom elementary school area, which is very chaotic. And then there's this kind of like superimposed layer on top, which regiments the circulation that exists around it. So I find that to be really successful, and especially the way that you start to use the ground covers to kind of like smear into one another. And I think that really suggests to me kind of like that flow from the inside to the outside of the classroom. And I think that's really successful in that, in the way you start to superimpose those layers. I think it looks very nice. But yeah, Ming.
Thank you.
You know, it's so funny. I actually find it really interesting, and I think you've done it very, very skillfully by adapting the graphic of, you know, the Art and Architecture magazine era of the, you know, 40s and 50s with curvilinear line and soft shape, but it's kind of man-made. And then I think it's really quite beautiful when I zoom into which one was this one, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6.
This one?
The one next to it, that one, yeah.
This one?
No, this one. This,
Sorry.
the one next to it, yes. The one to the left, yeah. So because this is when you see the how the playground and the living room that Kristy was describing is really designed, but then if you zoom out to the overall landscape, it merged beautifully well. It's just like almost seamless relationship between what is very, very carefully, of course you carefully design everything, but one always think about say natural landscape and topographic line and hill and slope as being natural, and then the living room area is much more prescribed in terms of where you exactly bend this curve and where you're going to be sitting around that bench. And I think that the two are really, really beautifully kind of play off each other.
Thank you. You mean this transition from this transition? Is that it?
I mean, yes, I'm talking in general in terms of like that composition, and then how the trees and which surround your site is basically is natural, and when you design the you know, all of this slope, that is what we call natural landscape, versus this is much more, it's organic, but much more disciplined in terms of one would draw those lines. And I think those two are interesting when they're next to each other. They do blend together really well.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eda. I think that's a great point, Ming. As you look into the final renders, she actually made the grass kind of plastic.
Yeah.
So I think that you know, like, is blending and yet is divided. Oh, there's the timer. And I think that Anna was pointing out burle marks. Yes, we look at burle marks. Actually, Eda, you know, the Brazilian landscape designer, and I think that he came back. We didn't think about the sunken living rooms, like Kristy pointed out, Miller House and all the Saarinen and more and much more. I think that the colors that she chose at the end, you know, also have that quality. The pillows and so on. So thank you, Eda, amazing work. You did incredible, you know, congratulations. You finished 2CAX, yeah, on Zoom. Yes. You know, this is a challenge, not only for you, I mean, for all of us. So we, you know, we went through. So thank you for your great work this semester.
Thank you all for the comments.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Karel. Karel, are you there? Yeah, there you are. So Karel, again, test resolution.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Yeah.
Let me try this again.
But yeah.
Yeah, I need to share the audio as well. Sorry.
But check that the audio is not too loud. That's the only thing.
Yeah, okay.
Ada, also copy all of the comments from the chat because you have many examples and so on. Before, when it closes, we lose a comment. So if you can expand, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Karel.
Yeah, I'll start now. So my name is Karel Chiang Zong, and
Sorry,
the concept.
I think the sound is too loud.
Okay. It's probably too.
Bring it down, or I would just talk. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the concept for my design project is derived from moss. For the furniture, the starting point is the spreading behavior of moss.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what he's saying.
Oh, we can hear you, yeah. So I would share again, but don't share the sound. I would stop and I would share again, but don't share the sound. It's too loud.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but if you play sound at the same time, it's a bit too loud. So I would just play.
Okay.
If you reshare the screen, I will share without the sound. Or if you can turn it off, yeah.
I'll just turn the sound
off.
off.
On the video, yeah.
Okay, so the concept for my design project is derived from moss. And for the furniture, the starting point is the spreading behavior of moss. So the chair is a boulder, stone, and a cheap-looking plastic chair. And the boulder geometry comes from nature and it provides a surface for moss to grow on. It is a straightforward representation of a mix of hybrid in terms of form and materiality. And moving from the scale of furniture to classroom, it is also a hybrid of stone features and plastic features. So in this example, it's an outdoors classroom. I chose to show this room because I wanted to show the potential of the flexibility of the program I have. And also this gesture, in a way, I'm also trying to address the issue of authenticity of nature with this synthesis of stone and plastic. And seeing the land on a larger scale in order to preserve the spreading of the moss as surfaces, my strategy is mainly subtracting instead of adding, which is kind of unique in the studio. The earth is excavated to house cave-like spaces with skylights and permeable openings. Activities mainly happens below ground level on this man-made playground with gentle contours. And the idea of hybrid materiality comes into play again while I am dealing with the landscape. To provide with necessary overhangs, a synthetic roof structure is developed. It is composed of a curvy plastic base frame, a mesh attached on top so sunlight can go through and moss can also grow on it. And while I'm doing research for the moss, I noticed the aspect of water consumption. So the complete layout of the project is informed by this feature. I have water pool area aims at building a new hierarchy with the same elements. And there are several swimming pools placed in an area that is closer to the main road. So it is partly oriented to the community as well. On the other hand of the site, there is the mosscape starts to permeate into the adjacent parks and across the train tracks. And here the moss surfaces are conceived as patches, a kind of mediating agent between the site and the context. So this is the overall layout of my project. I think the resolution is not so good, I guess, while it's playing.
But I think everybody has a mirror board. You guys can see it, but I think your renders are in high res. If you go down, Karel, and then zoom in on the renders.
I think there's a connection issue, and so
I
like
think
the
that
Vimeo is.
And everybody can check the animation or fast forward the animation from the render.
And I can zoom for anybody who needs to see any specific drawing.
Maybe you can zoom into this render, Karel, so we can see that.
Okay.
Also, I will close this window. You can close it if you click here.
Which one?
This lower window here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can close it with that.
How do I close this? Oh, okay. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
So you move to yeah.
Oh yeah.
If shift because that.
Are the classrooms nested under the landscape? Is that whole landscape level with the ground and it's carved underneath, or does it change in section as it goes?
The idea is like most of all this stuff is below ground level. It's sunken into the earth. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because the one thing that I find kind of interesting about your project is, though it doesn't change a lot in section, I noticed that as you get towards the river, it gets more flat and more underground, which is kind of interesting because then you kind of have this sloping section down to the river. But I was curious to know, like, what is the benefit of putting the classroom underneath the landscape versus it being on top? What kind of opportunities do you think that arises?
I think this decision is it came from my idea to have the moss kind of make it act like something that is spreading kind of gently instead of it's climbing up and down to the building that is growing up. So I decided to have the main classroom spaces to go down, and I guess that's it. And like I'm more focused on the landscape features of this whole project. So the space, so I chose to hide the space. You can say hide.
Yeah, because I mean you have all these surfaces that are all very disconnected, and the moss is kind of free flowing on top of those surfaces. And I was just wondering, like, is it more about creating an environment, or is it more about the actual organization of why those are underground? That's basically what I was trying to get at, because like I also wonder how the water has a role as well, because I know you mentioned it before. I think I made the comment last time about water. Maybe it was a little, but I was just wondering, like, is the water have something to do with the moss? Because they all seem like very disconnected right now, and I think it's intentional. I was just wondering why.
Okay, so the water is mainly how I decided to make this school to kind of specified in water sports, so that there are elements about water, and there might be some kind of activities related to water, and the water can maybe be used to kind of water these mosses, maybe.
Karel, I was just wondering, you started your presentation talking about an interest of using moss and boulders, right? I mean, and then I was really interested when you suddenly start talking about one of that your strategy is about subtracting as opposed to adding. So when I begin thinking about moss and I begin thinking about water, which is a very important feature in your project, and I start thinking about subtracting, which also suggesting some kind of excavation, because all of you have a lot of below ground classroom or area, playground and things like that, and I'm just wondering why if the idea of moss and cave and things feeling really humid, all of that did not come into play and be a stronger kind of design implementation for how you can achieve this, because you use all the right term, but your project feels first of all more like a water park, with like water slide and swimming pool and things like that, and I thought that the water element in your project, they all look like big swimming pool, which is not very conducive to make the moss very healthy, because because I can have a suspended belief that this project can exist somewhere in the valley where it's actually really hot and very, very dry. So the last kind of landscape or feature that I would even think of that can grow and survive in a kind of arid desert-like climate would be moss, because moss needs a lot of water, moss needs a lot of humidity. So to a certain extent, you're creating something that you really have to feed into it and nurture that in order for it to be very lush and very green and very mossy, right? So I say, okay, that's fine if that's what you are interested in doing. But then the way how you kind of contrast all of that with something extremely I would say kind of not natural swimming pool, kind of a plastic slide, all of that seems to contradict with the idea. So I just wanted you to speak to that a little bit more and see, because I was wondering if that is a real conscious effort of you to basically put those two things in kind of polar extreme conversation with each other.
Okay, so as to this question of like the material, like the moss to represent nature and the plastic things to represent like man-made stuff, I kind of think of this as like how we implement this idea of nature into a classroom, into a school. Like in my opinion, like in a way, these ideas are kind of like the contrasting points are already there. So I guess I'm just trying to address that with this synthetic form, maybe.
Well, one thing I realize is that by contrast with the first project, you actually have a lot of things that are kind of like ready-mades, that are not really hybridized with your own kind of design strategies. So we see a kind of prefab chair come in and they line themselves up in a grid, and we're looking at a blackboard, and then equipment comes in for the playground that seems to be a little bit like already kind of ready-made, something that you know, the bike, etc. There's certain things that begin to appear, including the space frame, even in the architecture, that seem to be things off the shelf that you kind of bring in. And so then the question becomes, how do you begin to integrate? You know, there could be a conceptual project, let's say, between the kind of ready-made and the way in which you design something a little bit more synthetically. Or there could be also a kind of statement to be made, well, how much of this is something that you want to really fully integrate at different scales, which is to say, it's not just the way the classroom moves into the outdoors. It's not just a reproduction of that classroom, but it's really a new idea about how that classroom would, or how nature moves into architecture, how some of the forms and curves and developments in like landscape design can really be implemented in something that normally and formally would have been understood a kind of architectural problem. So all of a sudden you're kind of like bringing the informal and the kind of curvature of this landscape into your own design process. And so that's, I think you'd need to kind of make a choice a little bit to understand how to include ideas from landscape in the way in which you construct your architecture. And right now those things haven't really been synthesized. And I was thinking also about the space frame in particular, that there is something quite kind of like stubborn and engineered about it. And yet I think it does provide this, you know, like some of the things that Jonathan was asking about, it does provide a roof, or it does provide some sort of idea about the production of like shading, etc. And I would want to, I guess, ask you to, if it's not the landscape that's like the primary concern, then maybe it becomes a roofscape. And how do you develop that architecturally? I'll put a link in the chat for Structure by Konrad Wachsmann, because I think that it's actually kind of a nice project to begin to understand how a structure that is a little bit kind of like stubborn, engineered, and like quite rigid, how it can actually begin to appear a little bit more free-formed, and also as a kind of hanging suspended landscape simply due to its density and size. And so here the question that Florencia brings up about different scales of construction and seeing things kind of like zoomed in versus zoomed out, I think that logic of thinking that Wachsmann brings could be very helpful to your work as well, because otherwise we kind of see it all at the same scale. And so maybe just kind of dig a little bit deeper and try to see references in other places than just the kind of, you know, the academic classroom that's like sitting students in rows, in grids, etc.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
One note about Washington is that there's a whole symposium that Mark Wrigley. So Karel, why don't you follow Mark Wrigley on, I'll put it on the chat, if not on Instagram, because he had they had like so many guests, an amazing symposium or event, I don't know, on his work, what Anna was putting on the chat. So I think that you have entertained for the break. Thank you for the reference.
I think I had questions about the moss too, similar to Ming's observation about it being kind of possible, I guess. Just, you know, and I'm no landscape architect. I don't have any real, I have zero expertise in, you know, plants. You know, I couldn't tell you what one tree's name was next to another one if I'm looking out the window. But I do know that when I see moss, it is wet, it is cool, it is usually in the shade, and there's a lot of humidity. And so I just wonder about this moss. So then I, you know, the kind of observation, the obvious, I mean, about it needing moisture, and all of a sudden I wonder whether this might become a kind of weird green blur building, like the Diller video blur building, like it's somehow needing mist, and it's somehow your relationship to water around this kind of space frame that's green and wet. And so similar to, I guess, my questions about the last project, in terms of there being gradients of something, maybe I think I was only talking about it relative to kind of play and the kind of the difference between the places, the programs in a school, between when you're kind of sitting still and when you're not, or when you're in a kind of place that requires more discipline or an order and then less. I wonder whether there might be something about understanding yours as, or I wonder if it might be useful, that is, to think about, like, if you foregrounded the water a little bit more, understanding that this moss requires a kind of, it needs to be wet all the time, right? I wonder whether all of a sudden you have wet places, kind of literally things are dripping, you know, so it's not just pools of water like going swimming or getting your feet wet, but there are places that are wet, and then there's probably microenvironments that kind of correspond to that a bit, and places that are dry, and whether you can start to kind of imagine the kind of programmatic shifts that happen that way. It would be a kind of really strange way of kind of rethinking a programmatic distribution of school, like what programs can be a little bit more wet and what can't, in a sense, or you know, and that might seem absurd, and it also might seem extremely limiting, except that it's kind of already there in your project, and so it seems like it's at least worth kind of considering. Maybe it's even a just kind of litmus test about just this kind of landscape, this kind of above your head landscape that, you know, so there is perhaps a kind of degrees of saturation or kind of wetness everywhere, but then there's obviously places that are dry, like even your second image where you see the kind of chairs that are implying this kind of outdoor classroom. It's dry as a bone, right? The sun is there, and any kind of moisture that might have been there kind of disappears immediately. Anyway, so I'm just curious about wetness and gradients of water relative to school program, and just curious like what that intersection might look like.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I see you said last comment, Florencia, so I'm sorry, I'll just be super quick and then I'll save it for next one. But I think for this one, Karel, I think you're, you know, the pools and, you know, what you're talking about is subtraction. And, you know, I can't help but, you know, here in Los Angeles and, you know, thinking of Dogtown, the Dogtown Boys, of the skateboarding history of Los Angeles, and the role of kind of pools as a place to have social engagement and interaction, and that might be useful for you to look at. I think also just fun to watch maybe over break, and think of kind of Los Angeles. But I just think that there's this kind of playful quality of pools, and I think these plastic elements that everyone's talked about, it certainly has an attitude about sort of plastic injection molding. And I'm just wondering, as you move forward, if you could think about like other types of molds, like that you could design, and think about how you could sort of use this same kind of mass-produced quality, but through a lens of sort of designing of the molds where you could articulate edges perhaps differently, and maybe mutate chairs to roof to desk, and begin to kind of work across these multiple scales. I'll keep that one short.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. We can always continue. Ciro, hi Ciro, did you find your way? I just put the link.
Sorry.
I think maybe. Yes.
Hi everyone. I look for it.
Thank
you. Great seeing you.
Thank you. Maybe you join us the next time, okay?
Next time. Yeah.
Ciao, Ciro.
Take
He's
care.
going to the review. He's going back to Marcela's review. They speak Spanish in the other review.
Talk soon.
This is mostly ladies, except for Jonathan. Jonathan, did you notice that?
Listen, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. Excellent. Hi, Ciro. So our next student, thank you, Karel. That's amazing. You know, I think that we always love the chair moss. I think you have to make that, you know, make a prototype of that. You know, that's your thesis, maybe. No. Kristy, remind him next year. You know, remember that chair that you did?
Right.
You have one more year to think about it.
Thanks
Okay.
for the comments.
Thank you Thank you, Karel. You know, I always thought that Karel's project is a mixture between, you know, Alvaro Sisa's swimming pools with, I don't know, Office Home Depot or something, you know, with the chair. But, you know, all that landscape and the moss anyway. So I think they all take the references, Karel, that you have in them and copy them into a notes or something like that.
Yeah.
So our next, thank you, everybody. Our next student is Jean. Thank you, Jean. So let's check on the resolution. So I don't know, I mean, why don't you test it? And in sound, if the sound is too loud, just turn it off and then you can speak.
Oh, okay. Let me show. I could see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Is my sound too loud? Is my sound okay?
It seems okay, yeah. And remember to expand next to the Vimeo. There's like expand, so you can make it full screen. The sound is okay, so you can begin again.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jin Xiao, and the story begins with a little flower which is not growing on the ground but on furniture. My project named Nature Lab, which is a new experimental way for school to teach. And I ask myself several questions. And the first is, what's the difference between my project classroom and normal classroom? The answer is my classroom aims to teach students or even the teacher a way to observe and train a special skill about nature, which means students need to cultivate plants, build the nature, and even design their own plant furnitures. Not only inside have the real natures, but also outside of the classrooms. The new teaching mode that students and teachers are immersed in the natures. In this way, it had a more direct effect on students and teacher. The furniture is not just decorations or tools, but also a new way for students to study in these kinds of classroom. The second question is why I use these pipes, curtains, and slabs as the building material. The answer is about curtain and the pipes is the same logic to build the furniture and the building, or even for the whole site. And they all composed by curtain, slab, and pipes. The aim is to set up quickly and easily. I want to establish a system to produce and transport this material. And for example, the iron pipes can be built like 3D printing. A machine can match the iron and make it to the design shapes, and the slab can be cut into small pieces. It can be reused. From the big scale to the smaller scales for the next time to use. And the curtain is portable and easy to process. It also can be reused. And the third question is what the aim for establishing these distance buildings? Why I build classroom in this way? The answer is this is a new system to establish a special school even in the remote area. It is also a way to propagandize and define the meaning of the special school, appealing to people to get along with the plants and the nature. Our human actually is a part of nature, not only, no matter how technology develop. How to appealing to people to get along with plants and natures. How our human actually is a part of natures. No matter how technology developed, we should respect and protect the natures. Last point is about outside the landscape. What was the stone, was the stone, sand, and artificial trees outside the classroom? We can see these things. Answer is I imitate the nature in different way, like the shape of the wave stone, like this, and the stone texture like water. Where in this picture, and the trees composed by plants and pipes. All these things are symbol of real nature and get along with the real nature. All these things aim to establish a special school to teach students and the teacher or any other people a way to observe and train a special skill and thinking about the nature and respect and cherish the nature. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Maybe you can put the grid images.
What image?
Can we look at them all first?
Yeah, put them all the grid. Yeah, zooming into all the grid.
Yeah, just look at all of them, put them all on your screen first. And then when we start talking more.
Like zooming like this, all those.
I like your board. I like your project a lot. I kind of don't want to get into the things that you're saying about it, because to me it doesn't, that's where it kind of falls apart for me in a way. But and in a way I was thinking, like, did he need to present orally at all? Or like, because in some ways I feel like the project explains itself really well. The relationships, there's obvious like threads that are being pulled through both kind of literally and in terms of the images. You can kind of understand it kind of tells its own story. And I think it's a little bit of a different story than the one that you told about it. And, kind of there, I don't know how to interrogate this as a school, but I just like this as a kind of thing that you made and thing that you worked on. The images are really beautiful, like starting with the one on the left. And I like how your board kind of opens up and kind of, it's doing the kind of Ray and Charles Eames powers of 10 thing that Florencia was suggesting in this image. We're definitely like little by little zooming out. And it's really, really nice. I like things like your color palettes and the kind of strange material qualities that I don't know how much they make sense at some scale, but it doesn't matter because it's just kind of this, it's more like an installation project, which you probably don't want to hear, but I think I like it in the way that you consume the images of installations and take pleasure in it. That's how I want to kind of consume this mural board in a sense. Anyway, so I think, and I actually like the way in which you scaled up and deployed this very same geometries and planes and kind of developed the furniture into your entire landscape, which is both landscape and architecture simultaneously. They don't necessarily, one is not ever, I don't think, discrete from the other. And perhaps that's the one place where I think you may have not taken full opportunity of this strange hybrid, is that you still have these kind of curious kind of art furniture pieces, these beautiful things that look like furniture but aren't furniture, you still have them kind of deployed in your project at the same scale as discrete things. And I guess I wish that they somehow made their way into the project a little bit less like how they started, so that you still see some similar kind of, you know, curious hybrids, the kind of Oppenheim teacup that was a kind of obvious thing because it's kind of fuzzy in the wrong places. It's furry in the places that are a little like you don't want to touch it or put your mouth on it. Obviously, you don't usually do that with furniture. You don't usually put your mouth on it, but it has a similar kind of resemblance. And I think I wish those kinds of things happened at these in-between scales, the in-between furniture and architecture scales and in-between architecture and landscape scales, that other things are kind of doing generally. And maybe it's because it relies on kind of geometry and line and surface. And so those things are able to kind of translate scale or kind of shift up and down scales really kind of effortlessly. But things like that quality that's happening with your furniture, where it looks like furniture, but it's something else, and it's kind of strange and it's hybrid quality. That's a little bit harder to kind of figure out how to make that effect, you know, as palpable or as strong in the, you know, as soon as it's not quite furniture with grass on the seat, right? But I think if you could figure that out, that would be pretty amazing. If you could figure out how to make it live in your project at that in-between scale and still have that kind of curious quality.
I would pick up on the comment of the kind of exhibition quality of it, Karel. And I think it's, you know, there's a huge jump between 7 and 8 in the board. So I do love how the board is kind of developing, as you indicated, Karel, but there's also this great quality of the sheet, as if the sheet is being kind of pulled off of the elements one by one. And so each time we progress along the way, we're able to kind of see more, right? So there's I don't know if that's intentional, but you know, it's almost like you get the furniture delivered and it has all the plastic on it. And as it gets closer and closer to being a concept of a school to actually deploying as a school, you would start to expose more and more of the project. Is sort of one reading I've had of it. I think there's also, it made me think a lot of Lily Reich and Mies van der Rohe's Café Samt and Seed, which is, you know, uses lines and kind of loose draped surfaces to define different spaces within a larger exhibition. And I think that way of thinking and translating that to the classroom, where you could quite literally kind of open up a curtain and now 2 classes could be combined into one, or you could close a curtain and you could break into, you know, breakout rooms or breakout spaces as we kind of think of them now. I think there is this dynamic quality to the project because of these rails and because of these lines. So that's maybe something, you know, I think we could see a little bit more of that in terms of your intention. There's a bit of this kind of hide and seek also, which I think is an interesting idea related to a kind of school and places where you might want to be exposed and around other people, and other places where, you know, I mean, we don't really want to hide in school, but places where it might want to be more intimate and you're in smaller groups. And so I think the premise, the organization seems really smart, but I think that if I were just going to tweak something, I would kind of look at that slide between 7 and 8 and think about what is the territory there between the kind of full bird's eye to the kind of slightly more zoomed bird's eye, and actually could we get in the project there between 7 and 8. So I'd be asking for a 7.5, I think.
Okay, and actually the processing, I broke up the classroom and combined them and turned the small scale to the bigger scale. Although I didn't show it, but I actually do these things to make them to the 8th picture.
Yeah. Great.
What I,
Thank you.
what I really like about your project, I think this is a really beautiful project, and I also think this project is answer the agenda of the studio, which has to do with this new open air classroom, and because I think there's all of this great kind of element that is reached between indoor and outdoor, and but what I like the most is the double reading of the project, because of the way you are scaling up your furniture, so that I could also be reading that the building is actually furniture scale with a tablecloth on top of it, and that the table or the tray that has furniture that has the green could be a roof of a building, and I like the fact that this notion of how you hybridize everything also allow for one to read the project into very, very different way. It's like when I look at your slide, your frame number 8, the I guess a tennis court is so small. It's like a furniture scale, but right? And then it's like you kind of zoom in, but it's actually, it's a really, really big thing, but it looks like a piece of furniture inside of the building, because the building is so much larger. But then when you zoom out at a different angle, then the building looks like a piece of furniture. So this notion of reading something and kind of have this trick of shift of scale, I think is really, really interesting in your project.
Yeah. And that's the way I make the shape from the small scale to the building scale and to the size scale.
Can you go to the aerial view of your project?
Oh,
yeah, that one, the second to last one, if you zoom in there.
Yes.
Or any of those, really. The one thing I really like about this is the lack of hierarchy in it. It's almost the same everywhere, to the point where the line that you're using, the kind of tube, starts to define zones. At least in my eyes, it does. So like you get like that pill shape in the middle, and like these kind of like zones you're defining through the line and not necessarily the surface, which I find very interesting. And I just wonder how that starts to kind of integrate the parts. Like no one's really talked about like where things are, which I find kind of interesting. Like, no, I don't really know like where exactly a classroom is versus like a gym or whatever kind of program it is, but it doesn't, I don't know if it really matters, but I find that really interesting in how the zones start to be defined and how the classrooms could start to like spill in and out of those in section versus in plan. So I find that really successful. Yeah, one thing that I really love too, that first render where you have like the tube coming out of the landscape, where like the landscape is kind of existing as that surface, like the greenery existing as a surface. I wish there was a little bit more of that in the final, because I think it's really beautiful, just kind of like these, you know, tubes coming out of the ground. When in the final one, it seems a little bit more like a formal like installation rather than things coming out of the earth. So I think you could have a little bit more of that, but it's overall very beautiful. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Those were great comments. Kristy, I was wondering if the team project for you, it relates more to the color background than the content. I'm not sure, but
I was thinking the kind of those pads that I forget what you called them. Was it the what you're referencing as stone?
Mm-hmm.
the things that are
Oh, the
not
water. He said like the marble water. I think it's almost like artificial water.
right. Yeah. And so I thought that those things were being constructed. And then the way that those things kind of interface with the more, structural elements of the line, I think as you move through Team's project. So that's why I was referencing that. There sort of seems like this kind of man-made quality of kind of almost like recycled material in combination with this more like elegant and refined
I get it,
material.
I thought it was about the aesthetics of the presentation, but no, I think, Jean, you should look at that. As I tell everybody, gather all the comments and the links. I'm opening them. They start to come up, but open them and save them. So thanks, everybody. Those are great comments. Jean, amazing work. I think those early renders are incredible. I mean, the same thing that I was telling to Karel. Oh, there you go. That's your timer. I was telling Karel, you have to fabricate them.
Yeah.
So you guys, you see, I'm in mute there because I had to put my phone. So I'm talking from my phone. My audio got crazy. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jean. Great work. And then we're going to move to our last project. These are like, we have 4 students now in the afternoon, 5 in the morning. We split it into 2 groups. Also another thing of Zoom, so the students could have longer reviews, 25-minute reviews. And then we don't go with 2 studios. So I would recommend all the faculty, the guest faculty, you can look at the Miro board to see what 2CX is doing on the parallel studios. Excellent. Gianli, there you are. So why don't you share and check on the issue I was saying about the sound. See that it doesn't overpower your presentation.
Thank you for our comment.
Wait, no, we cannot hear you, Shanli. Are you talking? We hear it clicking, but maybe that's somebody, or maybe I know that. But no, we cannot hear you. Shanli, if you have, like it happened to me with the sound, if you can link with the iPhone and or with an iPad, and then so I'm using the audio of my iPhone instead of the computer. And you just simply click on the link, so it doesn't affect your Zoom. Just click on the link, and it will take you from Wi-Fi, from internet directly. In the meantime, I use that as a chit chat with everybody. Thank you, guys. I know this is the last day of the reviews. We're getting there to the end. It's good for the students that they have the extra time, but at the same time, it's like, it's a lot of reviews, but they get the extra week of that.
It's true. It's true. but they, you know, it's nice because it feels a little celebratory because they know they're closing out the entire school.
Is somebody teaching 2She B here? No. Ming, are you teaching 2She B?
No, I'm not.
No. Your thesis? No. Anna, no. Also, no. You're not in there.
I was doing it for the last 2 years,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not this year. So I think Darren is still into GB, and I'm not sure who else.
Okay, but you were, yeah. It's just so I think so the students can connect to the 2She B when they're in the 2She BX. But I think that they'll go from there.
Darren is your connection. Who's
Darren is the connection.
GBX? Yeah.
Can you hear me, Florencia?
Yes, we can hear you, Jianli. Good, it works.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen.
The only thing, so you don't have echo, you have to turn off the audio from your computer. Otherwise, we hear you both, your computer and your iPhone.
Okay, I
There.
don't have audio.
But not only mute, you have to turn off the sound. I learned this week through reviews, through going in and out of audio.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, and we're still hearing the echo, I think.
Yeah, for the echo,
now.
it's low down the volume of the computer to 0. Okay, let's see now. You're sharing your screen, that's good?
What about now?
Yes, we hear you better.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. My idea about nature comes from mushroom, the shape of mushrooms and material of mushrooms. I use this element as some playground and landscape in classrooms. At first, the chairs are designed to look like mushroom groups, and they are made by mycelium. Mycelium are the long roots of mushroom on the ground. The mycelium behave like glue. They cementing subjects like sawdust and agricultural residues and transform the subjects to be solid and finally to be chairs. The shape and the material are also used to design classrooms. Mushroom shape was divide the classroom into different zones from different activities. And mushroom-like ball on the ground can be a ball pool for students to have fun. So, and mycelium material naturally provides students with a handle to climb the wall to roof. This reverse the mushroom ball also help teacher have lecture and integrate the little courtyard and classroom. Outside of the classroom, grassland are designed in similar ways. Some grassland are lifted up to form an outdoor stage and shape a classroom, increase the privacy of classrooms. And some grassland are lifted up to form office for teachers. Classrooms are connected by corridor made by mycelium on second floor. Therefore, they can go in any way friendly. Student can climb into classroom or swing into classroom through the ball pools on the ground. The roofs in the school are divided into 3 levels. Black point to main building and white road point to classroom and grassland point to interesting place like roof or floating rooms. One horizontal and one vertical building divide the whole school into 2 parts, kindergarten and primary school, grassland across classrooms and form office surrounding classrooms. Every classroom have its little courtyard and students have access, easy and interesting access to outdoor stage, stadium, and even the park next to the school. And finally, I would like to talk about the material mycelium. The mycelium mentioned in my project are inactivate, but I found that some scientists are trying to use some scientists are trying to use live mycelium to produce electronic products. So I think if we can use live mycelium, live fungal mushroom to as a material to build a building, the building may become a real mushroom, grow and develop to all duration by themselves. The more important is they may help maintain the balance of environment, even improve the environment, bring the forest back in our side, solve the pollution of the river near the school. So I place a corridor across the railroad and some construction, mycelium construction on the ground next to the river. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John Lee. Maybe if you can zoom into. Maybe if there might sound, maybe if you can zoom into, oh yeah, that's good in the grid, so critics can tell you. Thank you.
I didn't really know this mycelium kind of term, so I looked it up. And so mycelium, thank you for bringing our attention to it. I'm sure everybody else knew. I just not like a huge biology freak, but I think that what is curious about your project and potentially really interesting also formally is that, of course, there's such a distinction between the mushroom, and you're showing a champignon, which is like the white little, bulbous thing, as a kind of very strict figure that has a very particular form, versus this kind of mycelium, which is like never-ending fractal growing rhizomatic structure. And so the two are very different in the way in which we think of them mathematically, but also in the way in which we can begin to kind of play games with those things that are quite stable and kind of like specific in terms of their figuration, and those things that are a little bit unstable and informal and in a way like infinite. And so for what it's worth, like I think that you've tried to produce a limit, produce an edge condition for some of these, mathematically difficult kind of like rhizomatic structures. And I think that you've tried, but I'm not sure it's like the most extreme way of bridging and producing kind of like extreme conditions between the two things. But I do appreciate the premise, and I think that there's something really powerful about those two extremes, and kind of trying to work through exactly the kind of idea of the figuration and its limit, and it's like our ability to really see it clearly at kind of, let's say, high resolution and high contrast, versus those other structures that seem to be like difficult to capture and difficult to build with and think through.
Yeah, since you mentioned the fungi, one thing I find kind of interesting is that you mentioned the mycelium, but I put a link in the chat, but there's this movie called Fantastic Fungi. It's like a documentary about mushrooms and mycelium and fungus and all that stuff and how amazing it is. It's an amazing documentary. You should watch it. But the one thing that's kind of that you're not doing that I think that fungi does is that there's kind of the network, the mycelium network usually exists under a datum. So I'm seeing that in your project as being that kind of that bar, that surface where these mushrooms per se are kind of poking out of. So I feel like the material language that you're using on top should have been different from what it is underneath. So maybe you kind of have this smooth, like bulbous kind of thing on top versus maybe some kind of like mycelium kind of network underneath that surface. Because right now it's kind of giving me like bird's nest vibes. Like I've also put a bird's nest in there because there's this weaver bird that makes nests that look just like that. But I find I get the language of like them popping through the surface, but I think that if you were to change just the material nature of what that looks like, that it would have a totally different reading. But yeah, it's beautiful though. Great job.
Yeah, it's bird's nest like. It's also, I mean, when you say that, it reminds me of those spiders that make those like funneling webs. So they're kind of really beautiful and kind of perfect in the same. And, you know, the geometry is insane, but yet the form is somehow perfect and seductive in its kind of vessel making quality, which is kind of like what's so seductive about those bird's nests. It's like the vessel is perfect, like a potter would want to be able to do it as well as the bird does. And these have that quality. I've seen that movie too. Fantastic Fungi. It's a pretty good movie. What's beautiful about it is there's the first half is about mushrooms just in the forest, and there's a lot of time-lapse photography that just shows them. They quickly pop up and open up and proliferate, but when you see them with time-lapse photography, it's pretty amazing. And it's kind of the time-lapse photography that is so beautiful. And then the second half is about like psychedelics in the movie. But one thing I remember in that movie too is the way in which mycelium ends up growing on like dead things, like, right? So they kind of consume organic material after, like, as it's decaying, or it kind of helps the decay, like how it is that we define decay. And so I think I might associate, and it's weird to kind of have these associations like, oh, well, mycelium is kind of this datum. So perhaps if this is supposed to be kind of representational, or it's like these nests. So if it's, so the kind of representational thing is tricky. So even what I'm suggesting probably isn't that much different. It's not really a suggestion. It's just the observation or the remembering from that movie, the image of a mouse in time-lapse photography being kind of consumed, one might describe, by the mycelium was really disturbing, but so beautiful too, because it was this kind of cloud. It was so fine. It wasn't like mummifying the thing. It was just, it's like a cloud around this form that you recognize that kind of quickly disappeared as it got kind of, the cloud got denser, but in a more in a kind of cotton candy-like way. And so because I'm now making that association with both mycelium and the forms that you have, I wonder whether there are other objects that kind of facilitate the geometries that you're describing here, so that it's not just the kind of linear elements that describe vessels of space or volumes of space, but that there might be a kind of relationship between something that's kind of providing the scaffolding for these geometries. This looks like scaffolding. So what I mean by scaffolding is just that other thing, that the kind of object that's kind of providing the kind of initial impetus for the geometry, and perhaps even the kind of datum making, continuation, right? So that, like, if you saw the image, and I actually shortly after that movie was on a walk and saw exactly that, like there's lots of, like, I don't know, on my walks I see lots of death, but there was this small kind of mouse, and it was in a cloud, and I wish I took a photograph of it, because it was like something I'd never seen before, except in the movie and except on that walk, because it's so, I mean, it's it's you know, it's strange and creepy and a little kind of disturbing and disorienting, but it's also an amazing kind of material relationship, an amazing kind of structure, and a kind of something that you recognize being within this kind of material that you, I guess, don't recognize. Anyway, so that's my suggestion, is perhaps it's not, perhaps you need these other, something else, something that's kind of engaging or providing, again, the kind of impetus for these geometries.
Yeah, I wonder if that's related a little bit to what Jonathan was saying about maybe a bit more of a contrast between I might be overly paraphrasing Jonathan, but I guess I'm the kind of datum of these bars that you've created, and then the kind of bulges and bulbous quality that sort of happens above them, and that level of filigree that would allow light to kind of dapple in. And I mean, there's so many like incredible qualities that I think you're introducing, and also just a really like great solution or proposition for thinking about these open air classrooms that are sort of something between a roof and a kind of almost a canopy of trees, right? And sort of going back and forth between those two. But I think the idea that there might be some the ground that's maybe constructed differently, that has maybe a different type of rigidity, that occasionally, if it encountered the roof, or the roof, you know, it pulled up and encountered the roof and required the bulge to happen, or vice versa, that it would in some ways give you that thing to wrap, or that thing to negotiate. And so, you know, I'm seeing that a little bit on image 7. Where you're looking at the top view, and we see the kind of very filigree bird's nest bar, and then you see the slipping out of this kind of pattern and the stairs that are underneath. And I know that both of those are quite they're almost all 2.5D. Maybe that's another way I could say this, is I think the project is very successfully like living in this kind of 2.5D world, where it's like, you know, it occasionally breaks these kind of 3-dimensional barriers, but it also, you know, stays very kind of linear, filigree, and graphic in a lot of ways. And so I wonder if the ground could ever occasionally have this other geometry, or this other type of language that would have to encounter and negotiate with this kind of this system that you've developed, that I think would be able to manage something that would maybe be quite chunky, or be of a different sensibility, let's say, and that you'd then be able to use your language, your sensibility, to kind of take it over, consume it. And I think there would be some visual tension there that could contribute to the project. And of course, like, we aren't really talking too much about, you know, how the school would function, but I can't help myself but think of, like, they could also just be dumb blocks that like have bathrooms in them, you know, and then you have to kind of cover. I mean, even though we're having open air, I mean, there's still a ton of things that would require, I think, more traditional enclosed rooms. And so I think your system is really smart in that I think it could allow for those things to happen, and determine when and how much it wants to camouflage something or take something over. And so I think that would be a territory to kind of really move towards, to push something into the system that's not as friendly to it. And I think your system would then have to do more work, and would be able to do it really well.
The other thing I realize is, or that I'm just remembering, is that sometimes the underground mycelium ends up producing, because of its kind of it's rhizome-like, but it also is directional at times, and it produces these something called fairy rings, so that the mushrooms that kind of blossom, or I don't know what the right word is, above the ground, above the earth, in like these perfect circles, and they're and that's strange too, like the kind of strange geometries. It's like crop circles in a way, like these strange geometries that occur above ground because of the kind of network geometries below ground. The other funny thing is that they're called fairy circles, and that there's a kind of mythology, or that there's you know, stories that get made to kind of just the associations with kind of magic or kind of enchantment is interesting, because we're talking about children in a school too. And just to think not just necessarily about mushrooms, but about the ways in which nature always provides these kinds of mysteries, these kinds of relationships that have mythological kind of associations, enchanted qualities. There may be ways in which to kind of incorporate, I mean, I think this is a whole nother direction in a way than what's being described in terms of like the stuff, its geometry, its relationship to mycelium and so forth. That's like one thing, but that perhaps like leaves the mushrooms behind as mushrooms, but because now you're talking about like geometry and structure and material. But I don't know, is there room to kind of bring in kind of mythology and to bring nature in, even if it's an artificial nature, to kind of look for those kinds of relationships that already kind of exist in the world, and to think about why certain types of natures or certain types of qualities of nature end up providing the kind of enchanted, they are the kind of meat of, they are the stuff of enchantment, of enchanted worlds. And there may be something productive in kind of thinking about that if you're thinking about childhood and school.
You know, I think, Karen, you bring up a really fantastic point, because the whole time I keep on thinking that this one project has the most interesting and the best material and premise to work with, right? And it is so rich. But there was something that kind of bothered me a little bit, because the more I look at the project, I was thinking this is such a graphic project, the way, and it's so far, it veers so far away from what we understand and the characteristic of what mycelium is, because you essentially just kind of loosely use the network of the mycelium to provide a canopy over the classroom and the building as a, and then the other part is the flatness of the ground, which again is it's a kind of is a graphic that mirror the canopy to a certain extent. So those two layers kind of exists in kind of independently from each other, and there is not this structure and this link of something growing from the ground, something that really make us understand the really kind of dense and complex network that mycelium could provide, and the fact that you bring up the notion of kind of mythology and this whole kind of Gothic and this, I mean, it's just there's something about it. It's a completely different, two different directions, and I know that you're bringing that up as a different direction, but I think there's something valuable to consider when we're using such an intriguing material to start with.
Thank you, Ming, and thank you, everybody. So this is when I say, Jianli, when you introduce an element, in this case, it's the mycelium, you know, it opens a conversation on itself. So I think that the project goes beyond. I mean, I think all the comments are fantastic, from the fairy tales, the landscape fairy tales, to the, you know, to the understanding of the, you know, the material itself, to what Kristy was saying about the fact that you don't need any enclosure, you know, which I think that was always my point with this studio. So Jianli, thank you for your project. It looks amazing. The textures, I agree with Ming. You know, the textures that once you start to get close to that, you start to get a texture. It looks like that image that Jonathan uploaded of the bird's nest. not the one in Beijing, the actual, the real one. So Shanley, if you don't mind, if you stop share, so we get back the grid, so we get just a few minutes for closing comments. I wanted to thank our guest for this afternoon. That was amazing. Amazing feedback from everybody. I think that Cynthia, she's still on the phone, on the car maybe. She got all that. I see her there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I am so sorry. I had an emergency with my parents' doctor, and I apologize. But what I saw looked amazing, and this site is a real site, and I can't say anything I think intelligent about it because I missed too much, but I would love to follow up with you on it and see, because we are going to be working with the city on some things for Taylor Yard, and I have worked on projects for that site before, so I would love to hear more about it and follow up with you on it. I just apologize. But
Thank
it really
you,
looks
Cynthia.
beautiful.
You can see all that in the mirror board, but let's have coffee later, and then I'll give you all the update on that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for your patience and flexibility. Thank you. Congratulations to everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Well, it was really nice to come. Thanks for the invitation. I wanted to say that I think the kind of outdoor landscape classroom, it offers so many opportunities for like rethinking what the limits or lack of limits of architecture are. And the one thing that I thought would come to mind a little bit is how all of this work interfaces between the image production and the kind of details in the construction of the actual pieces. There's so many crazy and interesting materials that go into a lot of the design of some of these kinds of landscapes. But then there are also kind of specificities to how we might begin to draw them and how to consider some of the details. So if anything, I would say a lot of these images can become even more specific and even more kind of detailed. But it's a really interesting collection of proposals. So thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I mean, I particularly like the prompt about thinking about the room as something that can be enclosed and air conditioned, as we, I think, often think of it, but also expanding our understanding to the room as something that, you know, we could think of quite literally as like an outdoor room, and that really it is surfaces that define a room. Right, and those surfaces can be in the amazing territories that all of you have presented here today. That the surfaces of the ground, the surfaces of kind of partial walls that are built in and carved in or built up. The way that, you know, a roof could be more like a pavilion or a canopy or a tent, like some of you proposed. That I think that you know, as you guys are all thinking about and kind of diving back in full steam into your sort of this architectural realm, that Florencia would have opened up for all of you this expanded view of what a room is and how you can begin to kind of manage and negotiate surfaces in relationship with one another in order to define space. That doesn't necessarily have to have the thresholds and the openings that we traditionally think of when we think of a room. I think that's a really great foundation as you move through the coming semesters, to have this expanded view of your responsibility to kind of think of all surfaces, not just as kind of architecture as a mass that then gets kind of filled in. But you guys are kind of starting with the filling in part. And I think that that's really, really beautiful. So thank you for sharing your work with me today.
Yeah, one note on that, sorry, Kristy, is that this studio, I mean, Jonathan can tell from the studio 2 years ago, which was more technique based. I think that this studio sets the students to individual narratives. You know, each student build up on their own interest and then develop the project. It sets them on the path towards thesis, towards you. So I think, I mean, I don't know, I mean, Jonathan, you agree, but that, it's likely, it's a very different 2CAX. The students keep on asking, what is 2CAX? What are we doing 2CAX? And I would have to say, I mean, I don't know, after I've taught 2CAX for like 10 years, and even Faris, who's there also, is that, so all of these things, even to get closer to the material, even closer, much closer than what they did. I think it sets for individual, investigation and research that I think is something different that we did this year, not only at the program level.
Yeah, but I think you, go ahead.
That the studio set out really was very helpful for the student to think about zooming out. So, we always look at everything as zooming in. So you go from the outside in, you go from the macro to the micro. But I think in this situation, I really like the premise of using the power of 10 to really look at something at the furniture scale. And then you start zooming out and you start thinking at the architecture scale, and then at that urban scale. I think this project is really, I think, very successful in terms of asking the student to begin thinking about those 3 different scales. And then there's a continuity of thought and continuity of how do you synthesize those 3 scales, what is the relationship between them. So I find that this is for me, it's a really, really, really good first project, first term project for the 2GAX. And I think all of you did really, really wonderfully well. So that's great.
I wanted to, well, Kristy said something about room and it made me think something else about this studio. I remember sending Florencia a scan of a chapter of a book last for mid-review, remember? I don't remember what chapter it was, but I think it was a chapter from Jane Bennett's book, Influx and Efflux. And I don't know if it's the same chapter as what I wanted to describe to you guys right now. But she writes about, this book is called Influx and Efflux, and she writes about the relationship of, influx is influence, often influences of nature or by nature. And she talks about Thoreau, through his writing, he writes about the influence of nature on him so beautifully and so well. And he writes about having to kind of get back to his cabin, get back to his architecture, get back to his room, get back to that space in order to kind of like unpack all that influence, in order to kind of decompress all of the stuff that would kind of he acquired while being out in the world or being out in nature. And I think it's a really kind of beautiful argument for architecture in a way. So it's not always just shelter, it's not always just comfort, but it's just this kind of, it sets up perhaps an opportunity for nature to kind of have a more profound influence on you, or have a different kind of influence on you than if you were a squirrel and kind of always lived in nature. But so this kind of, and it describes a different requirement for architecture, that you have a place to kind of unpack from any kind of aspect of the world. And because you guys are kind of setting up the project in terms of, okay, so forget school perhaps, but just this idea of nature and a kind of idea of architecture. As Kristy describes room, I'm thinking about Thoreau and the kind of need for him to kind of have that room because he was out in the world and because he was in nature and because nature was so impactful on him. And it was that room that that's where he was able to write about how nature influenced him. So the way he kind of debriefed or decompressed or unpacked it all was through writing. And but anyway, so I really love that kind of argument for architecture and that kind of the kind of, it kind of sets up this relationship between nature and architecture in a really unusual way. In terms of this, her text is called Influx and Efflux, and it's not about architecture, but that there's that moment where it is about architecture. And it makes me think of your project and think of Kristy's description of room.
Yeah, I think something that I find kind of interesting, I've been seeing of a new trend, not in a lot of architecture schools, but specifically at SciArc, that a lot of the projects now I feel like are becoming a lot about environment, like designing an environment, not necessarily designing a building or designing a landscape. It's really about the total package of designing that environment. And I would really push you guys to really take that to like the next level, because we were talking about like some of the water. It's like, what is like a space that's humid? What does that look like? How does that feel? And like in terms of your representations, how you guys really start to drive that into your other projects, where you're designing a building, you're designing some kind of object in this case in a landscape, but what kind of environment does that thing exist in, and what is the kind of constructed nature or synthetic way that you guys are kind of constructing the environment which is around that thing and is projecting back onto it. So I think it's always about, in terms of how you represent the building, but also how you start to manipulate those representations and the environment around it to make your argument stronger. So I would say that, I mean, you guys did an amazing job. The projects all looked really great. And I would really challenge you guys to kind of push the representational aspects, which describe your project in a more niche kind of way to make it a little bit more specific. But yeah, overall, really great job. And I would say, Florencia, going back to 2GAX, I do find this studio is very different from how we did it. And it was actually very refreshing. It was really nice to see how everybody approached the project and the different kinds of techniques that you guys use to create your thing. So I really commend you guys on that, and great job. And I hope your first semester of virtual SciArc went smoothly.
Taught by somebody that had his final semester of SciArc at thesis on Zoom as well. So, you know, you like close the loop. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan, Ming, Karel, and Kristy. Thank you for, joining us today and all your insightful comments. And, hope you have a happy holidays. And I'll see you next semester, next year.
Yeah, I hope to see all of you soon.
It will be a better year.
Yes, it will be.
Yes, let's hope for a better year.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
We'll have a better year. Bye, guys. So, students, stay a little bit. Don't leave yet. Bye, Kristy. Bye, Karel. Bye, Jonathan.
Congratulations.
Jonathan, I'll call you next week. Okay, here we are. Just like a green grid. We're missing some of the students. I think maybe people want to sleep. But we have, Faris maintains our grade over there. Okay, you guys, we're done. Cheers. I have water or coffee, either one. Cheers to everybody. You guys did amazing, I mean, I know this is difficult. That's what I was pointing out to Jonathan, who it was tough for the thesis students to end SciArc on Zoom. I think ending SciArc at Zoom is more difficult than starting SciArc at Zoom. He's gone, so I can say that, but not that I don't tell him that, but I think that you guys, you put a lot of effort. Faris is more like in between worlds. He started live and then he went Zoom. So he has adapted, I will guess.
Yeah. I hope we can go back. Well, yeah, we'll go back.
We all hope, we have a vaccine. I mean, we're like, I just got text messages that is, the whole city is on shutdown, but we'll recover from that. So, and 2GBX is going to be, also a great semester. I mean, the quality of the work does not go down. I tell you, like, I think that you all presented amazing work. The level everything that you contribute in your portfolio is really of the highest quality. So I think that the fake animation work, because in the end in your portfolio, you need those renders. You know, like it's hard to share an animation. So focusing on the renders, you know, set that up. You also saw, as I have that from the earlier session, Austin, Murtad, and Kate, you know, different group of juries get you different reviews. You know, so reviews change, but I think that having two groups, it changes the conversation, but at the same time, you know, like I think it gives more air through the to the reviews. So I don't know what you guys thought, but I think that as you move on to 2C BX, I would recommend that to your future advisors. You know, it helps to have, you need more critics, you need a lot of critics to invite, but you have, you know, you have less of Zoom fatigue. Fatigue, not for us, all of us been here since, and Faris was there. So anyway, so you guys have any comments, any final recommendations or final comments for as we close today or 2CAX Studio?
Thank you so much, Florencia. Like, it has been a tough but like a good semester. Like in the end, I enjoyed the work that I did, and like, thank you for the studio, and thank you for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Florencia. I agree with that.
I think that you guys, you know, like you guys, they all did an amazing job. You know, you're on your own, you know, with a computer, with help, with like a, you know, the lack of or space, you know, all of that. That's not easy, but you could not tell. I tell you, you cannot tell when you look at the work. And another thing I have to say about Zoom is that when you're standing up there and you're presenting, I think you guys present it much better. Maybe because Zoom allows you, you're sitting down, you have a cup of coffee, or like you're sitting down and you're reading on something. I thought that I saw better presentations today than what I had seen before at this earlier part of of your education, not at the later. But I think that, you know, there's some benefits to the Zoom that are good. And, you know, I mean, I know, Merzad, we had some issues with resolution, but then we were able to see your movie, and then we saw your renders, and everything was high res after that. So I think that we had you had extra time, so we gave you that as opposed to being the first one. So
yeah, because I think I didn't
kind
know
of challenge that.
I shouldn't click one of those like boxes, Faris after Faris. Yeah, so I think that's why my resolution went down.
But I think that then it went well. Like I saw it in different reviews that they were saying about optimizing, so it didn't have, but that didn't work. Yeah. It didn't work. Like it was my recommendation because I got it from other faculty in other reviews, but I'm like, but that doesn't help. It's not optimizing. It's like de-optimizing. And Faris texted me and said they have to take it out, the optimize. So, and then sound. But, you know, other than that, I think the Merzad, thank you for being a test. But I think that, you know, I think it worked out, and you were able to present the renders well. So I think that worked well. I don't know if Faris, I mean, you guys have not been, the other reviews are still, I think, are still running. So I recommend you guys to pop in just to check out what's happening with your fellow friends. Or if not, at least see the Miro board so you see the full extent of that.
Are the other reviews on YouTube as live links? Because when I was looking, I probably just like missed something, but I was looking at the link tree, and I see the videos for midterm, and I see our live link, but I didn't see the other studios.
Faris would know. I don't know. I mean, Faris sent the code, so everybody should.
Rachel messaged me, and she said that she wasn't able to use the link that I gave because I made new links for the final. And apparently some of them are using the same Zoom link that they use for midterm. So